way in which the idea of total depravity and the idea of original sin as being some kind of full disconnection from God is one of the deepest shackles that binds Christianity.
Mm.
Because exactly what you're saying, the fall through Christ is an arc. It's a story arc. It's an arc of existence and time, but it's not the whole picture. It's not the whole picture. And like, at least in my upbringing in the in the Protestant, and I do not mean this in a derogatory way, because I am deeply appreciative of what my upbringing was, and also my time in the evangelical churches. But I never had this sense, and I'm not saying everyone has this, but for me, in my experience of it, I never had this sense that there was that I was doing anything other than just kind of like skating by through this life until I could die and go to heaven.
Mm.
Because in this deep Gnostic kind of way, the material was fallen. It's all, this is that we are just pilgrims here, right? Like
Yeah.
we're all passing to our home, and all this kind of axial dualistic, like we're all going to go to heaven. And but at the end of the day, that's not Christianity. You cannot abide by the axioms that underlie the Christian story. You cannot have the Christian ontology. And this is why it's eroded fundamentally, is that the Christian ontology does not work with that being the primary arc of history. You cannot have one God, and Christ cannot be what the claims are that he actually is, if there's no good first and good after.
So I'm trying to think if there's a way in which, like, I'm just checking myself to see, like, is that again, it's sort of like I'm trying to check this out propositionally, but I don't. I'm just trying to see if it, like, theologically, if I'm on that same page, because what I think I know, and look, there's all kinds of different interpretations here. So I'm not saying that mine's the only one on offer at all. I'm using it just as an example of a way in which a technology can subvert and you lose contact with the foundational layer of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when in the garden, which is good, and all the things made are good, God says, like, look, everything here for you it's good for you to eat, except for this one thing. Don't eat it. And so we sort of see that's accepted and okay. But then, the serpent, he works his way in here and he says, did God really say? And so what's the fundamental technology here is, like, it's a subversion from the truth, because notice that when, like, Eve, and this isn't about gender and all that stuff, like, guys, please, like, that's so, like, childish to be like, oh, Eve was the first one who, no, that's God, my 3-year-old is not going to analyze it at that level.
Yeah.
But, like,
and
when
also to the degree that there is feminine and masculine involved here, it has nothing to do with the way in which we understand feminine and masculine in our gendered current way. Like, that's so superficial that it's asinine.
Yeah, it's like, man, come on. There, of all the ways you could read it, that's maybe one of the most banal. Like,
Yeah.
you can't give me it. It's like a $2
Unbelievably trivial
version. Yeah. So the more fascinating thing to me is that she comes to Adam and she says, "Hey, what about this fruit?" And he's like, "Yeah, we can't eat it or we'll die." And she's like, you can't even touch it or you'll die. It's like, wait a minute. We've already made contact here with like Control J, because like that isn't what God said, but she's already been subverted. So like everything that goes on from there, it's like it's adjustment layers. I mean, maybe we should write a script instead of Adjustment Bureau, which is just it's a fantastic story. Adjustment layer, and
Oh,
you
that's a good idea, actually. You could, I really like this analogy, right? Because that's better than metaphor, I think. But you can participate in it. You can participate in this. There's a way in which you can play it on different levels at the same time, but the way in which the layers come apart and the way in which they do it unconsciously is
yeah, I mean, and look, it gets even to me more fascinating when like this is like one of the deepest moments in all of scripture to me is when God calls out. This is the the origination of the ethical echo. Where
mm,
are you?
oh
And
yes.
Adam is like, I mean, we're hiding.
Hmm.
And he says, like, okay, why? And this to me is so heartbreaking as a father. Like, it's going to hit you hard whenever you become a father because, like, when your child says something that's just so devastatingly wrong that, like, how on earth he says, so why are you hiding? Well, we did the fruit thing, but and then we realize, like, we are naked. And when he says that word, it's like if you can put on just the mind of like one in relationship to the person telling you this thing, that agape, that to hear that word come from this beloved's mouth, that is it is deprecatory, like it's bad, it's negative, it's distorted.
Mm,
And God doesn't say, like, he says, well, like, who told you that? That's
mm,
not my word for you. Like, I don't describe you in these terms. Where did you get
mm,
this word naked from? Like, where is this coming
mm,
from? You had the ability to name every single thing appropriately by its name. And
mm,
all of a sudden, you're not even saying the right thing about yourself. Like, it's
mhm,
like you imagine your daughter coming home and she's beautiful to you. She's like crying. And you're like, what's the matter with you? And she's like, I'm fat. I'm worthless. I'm like, it's like, who told you that? Oh my God, why? Why would you say that about yourself? And it's like, man, so people, they miss the the just the heart-wrenching nature of this linguistic, like, this term is not God's term for them.
mhm,
And they learned this term from their enemy and
mm,
then appropriated it and aimed it at themselves.
mhm, mhm,
And so why do you think one reason why God is so mad at the serpent is like, you told them that? Like,
mm,
that's your word. And I know
mm.
whose word it, but I wanted to hear them say, like, who told you this? Where did this word come from? And man, I mean, I think for me, like this whole subversion, we can bring it into the here and now, and like the example that I give people is, what comedians are so great at is, like, besides being funny, is that and that they are able to see things that we've just become blind to because they're so
Mhm,
obvious.
mhm,
Like, it's
mhm,
like one of the hardest things in the world is to say something original about something that's just right there in your face. But
mhm,
that's like one of their keen. This is why, man. even Shakespeare is like the person that can say the truth is
Mm.
always the blind man or the fool,
Yeah,
the
this is why the
joker.
Joker. This is why the Joker always sits by the king's side.
That's right. That's
Like,
yes.
yeah,
Think about how profound that is like
yeah.
this. So all right, the context in which I grew up is like I there were there was no road. I
Mm,
lived in the middle of nowhere,
mm,
and there was no light pollution. So like when my wife and I go home to visit my family, they live on a farm, and it's just like you enter a
mm,
different realm. And it's because
mm,
you leave something behind, the whole
mm,
Heideggerian technology conceals and reveals. And so you don't realize what's being concealed. You think the city is like where all the technology and everything is, and then you get out here where all of a sudden you're seeing something that we've taken for granted, which is
mm,
stars.
mm.
And let me just interject that we, at our own peril, we demonstrate our temporal chauvinism by looking back on the past and claiming that these people were fools, didn't know what they were talking about because they didn't have an iPhone. Um,
Yeah, the hubris is absolutely
it's
devastating.
staggering. What? Get any of your most intelligent friends, get them together, and say we're going to start a society and a civilization, and we're going to somehow figure out what the heck procession is. It's so staggering, just that one fact about these what we call prehistoric societies. How do you figure out what the sun does over the
Hmm.
course of tens of thousands of years without being able to observe it and not having a concrete way of memorializing it? Man, they built that stuff into every nook and cranny of their culture to
Now,
help.
I'd,
Yeah,
I'd
go.
like to interject something as an aside here, and because this goes back to a point that you made earlier about Socrates and the written word. Because, one of the things that um, Jordan Peterson talks about is how the oral traditions, what gets remembered is what matters. What gets remembered is the meaning. And so there's a way in which the oral culture, we look down on them from our edifice of propositions
That's
and
right.
say, oh my, look at how they couldn't keep their facts right. Well, of course they couldn't keep their facts right because they were so sad they couldn't write it down and they just had to tell each other, no, no, it doesn't matter what the facts were. It matters what it told you about how to be now. Because what you don't care about is the facts of the world that existed in the past or will exist in the future. What you care about is how to orient yourself now and how to conduct yourself now in a way that affords flourishing over the longest time span and over the broadest horizon that you can't imagine. And that's what matters. And to get there, you need a through line. You need a through line of logos. And you can never capture that in words. Like you can write all the books in the world and you can't that every word it's a mesh network. Every word is held in tension with every other word. And this is how the mountain is built. And there's through lines, but they're underneath the words.
Hmm.
And and it just I think I resonate so much with what you're saying there because it does like the degradation of wisdom in order to worship some kind of perverse desire for certainty, which is what we don't even want, is just it's heartbreaking to recognize how much we have all existentially suffered because of that subversion.
And the sort of Socratic fatigue critique of this is that what's going on here is analysis. And so by Aristotle, you get sort of inklings of a science. And right, science is about cutting things into pieces so we can analyze them. We need
Yeah.
to be able to analyze,
And it's not
but
that it's bad. Like, thank God
no,
for that. Like, all,
yeah, of
but
course.
it's a different layer.
It is. And one of the best quotes on this, I think, is by the late uh, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I commend like everything he's written
Mm,
to your audience. It's just such a beautiful, brilliant man.
mm,
PhDs from Cambridge, came to become a rabbi later in life, and he said, he's had debates with fundamental thinkers like Dawkins, and one of the arguments he makes is he said, science of of all people, he's like, come on, man. I like Jewish people, although they represent such a small portion of the human population. Of course, we love science. He's like, we're disproportionately represented in Nobel prizes. Like, of
mhm,
course, we focus on learning. We value learning and study and science. He said, but science is good at taking things apart to see how they work. Religion is good at putting things together to see what they mean. And I mean, religio literally means to bind together. And so
mhm,
he's onto something there. And what I would say is like, the people do not realize how hard it is to survive.
mm,
We have a veneer of civilization around us that it it completely deludes us into thinking that we're more powerful than we
mm,
are. And again,
mm,
this is man, we are so dislocated, and this is a warning. I'm warning
mhm,
people. We're so dislocated from the natural world that we do not perceive things as they are. So I'm telling you about like growing up in this farming community, and look, a lot of the guys, like my grandparents, they didn't have formal educations, but they knew something about phenomenologically. I don't know if you've talked with Jonathan Peugeot yet, but like the kind of, whether you want to call it like a traditional view of the world, where for them there was no bifurcation, no separation between life and death. They were all
mm,
cycles that you witnessed in every planting season, every growing season, every harvesting, every litter, every new calf, whatever it was, and then the slaughter of that thing. And it's just erroneous to think that for all of history people were just barbaric. And I mean, it's very hard to live this way,
mhm,
especially but look, I like, you want to eat meat. You want to eat soy. I don't care. But what I am telling you is, almost no one who's listening to me grows their own soy and like hunts and or grows their livestock, is a husbandman to that, and then does the slaughtering and the processing of it. My grandparents, in the kind of context that they lived in, my father grew up without electricity
mm,
until right before my oldest brother was born.
mhm,
My grandparents just didn't, they didn't just even see the value, and they're like, what do we need it for? We've
mm.
lived all these years without it.
Wow.
And there was something that we would do annually. The old one, los viejos, like the old white-haired people in my community, they would come together, and it was like Pioneer Day. I don't know what else to call it, but it was something
Mm,
like that, where you weren't allowed electricity for a
mm,
discrete period of time, and you had to do everything as they did it.
mm,
And you had to sleep out in the cold, like you had to do like from scratch the way they did. And look, these old men, it was it was an honor for them to raise a, say, like a calf, that they knew the community would partake in.
Mm.
That calf would have like a, it's a personality, like a name. It was well known on the farm, whatever. But it also had to be sacrificed for the good of everyone, right? And so to stand there and watch the talk about sacred,
Mm.
like the way in which they would handle the knife, the way in which they would approach the animal, the sort of mindfulness towards this is how you do this so that the animal doesn't suffer.
Mhm.
All of that
The
was like,
true care that was present even in the
yes,
sacrifice.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. It is a sacrifice,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that it didn't cost the person anything, like that
Well,
they had no feeling towards it.
and the thing is now we sacrifice as much or maybe more than we ever did before, but we're so far removed from it. You buy your iPhone, and there is sacrifice behind that
That's right.
in the blood, sweat, and tears of the people in the mines and the people who, like, the existence of so many people across this globe that those of us who are unbelievably privileged to sit at the top do not witness. And even if we attempt to take a posture of sympathy towards them, we do so from an edifice so high on an existential level that it's so like it's almost self-aggrandizing in the way that it's what's the word, like pity,
Yeah.
like we like it's there's it's it's why our most brilliant people who are working on trying to understand what it means to be alive don't sit with anyone who's dying. like
Yes.
like I can't, like, that is one of the most profound, like one of the most profound explications of the foundational ways in which we are experiencing a meaning crisis.
Don't make me be around and experience the suffering. Let me
Yeah.
stay in my office and write about it
No, you
as
need.
if, as I imagine how I would be if I were in the same way that we do things like imagine the best of all possible worlds. And the unique thing about the best of all possible worlds is it usually has missing all of the bad things about this world. I
Mhm.
mean, that's a really simple, I mean, like, these are armchair exercises, great for thought, but there's a practicality of you invoking Sartre. Um, we experience these sort of micro hells. One of my friends told me, someone asked him how he learned Hungarian, and he said, I learned it from some homeless people in Hungary. And they were like, shut up. And he was like, no, seriously, that's how I learned it. I hung out with just, ordinary people, homeless people. And this is what they taught me. This is how they taught me. He said to me, he said, you guys are worried about trolley car problems. And he said, screw that, man. Like, they're over there in the thick of it right now with this war. And he was like, I'm worried about, like, what are you going to do when you pass the man with no food? Like, and that's a practical, applied ethical question today. And he said, you can either give them money enough to get the hamburger, and you can tell yourself, well, I've eaten about 365 consecutive days of food, and this person has gone without for some duration of time. He said that the struggle that we're facing is, which one do we give it to? Can't give it to everyone because we don't have enough to give to everyone, but I have to decide to give it to someone. And he said, or you can turn from that person, pretend you didn't hear your conscience tell you to give. And he said, that moment you are experiencing like hell, because you're
Mm.
turning from your brother, you're turning from God, and you know it. And what's so weird about this is that you can't make yourself not know it. Like,
Yes.
you know it, even as
Everything
bad
you
as
everything you ever experience is with you forever. And you
isn't
can,
that weird though?
yeah.
That you can't make yourself not feel you can't, like, your
You can,
conscience, it
you,
implicates you whether you're in on it or not.
yeah, and you can
How?
put it like you can put it into the unconscious,
Mhm.
but it lurks in the darkness, and now the power of attention that is available to you as a being is diminished, and that unconscious will pull on your relevance realization, and it will pull it
Yikes.
downward,
Yikes.
and
Yikes.
you will continue to actualize a lower level of hell. Like, this is straightforward. This is how sin works. Like, this is the the what the functional day-to-day manifestation of hell into your own personal life. It's it it's
And
the
this,
movement. No, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, like, probably one of the books that I've read the most, just because scares me, it keeps me on my toes, is The Great Divorce, where C.S.
Mm.
Lewis, he has George MacDonald being the person that sort of negotiates the person into this afterlife. And it's this idea that we are ever becoming more who we will be, and
Mhm.
we're crystallizing into something that when we when we aren't truthful with ourselves, and when we sin, and for practical purposes, what I mean by that is exactly what the scripture would say, is like, it's not just about like bad, but it's like, to him that knoweth to do good
Mhm.
and doeth it not, to him that is sin. And so we kind of focus a lot on, like, what are all the things I did wrong? And there are some people out here who've lived almost morally blameless lives. But the problem with that is like, morally blameless in terms of like, I didn't lie, I didn't cheat, I didn't steal, I didn't covet, I didn't blaspheme, whatever. But it's like, what about all the good you did not do?
This is why the law is the taskmaster.
It's
The law
right.
cannot lead you to the kingdom of heaven.
It can't.
Yeah, because
And so,
I think there's actually like a technical definition of what sin is, and it is the any intentional choice to avoid something that that appears to you as the highest option, as the highest actualization that you are capable of in a moment,
hmm,
and the choice to arbitrate and choose the lesser in anything is the actual way in which sin, that is technically what it means to sin. That is technically what, because it's a missing of the mark, right? There is a mark, and you don't know what it is, and no one knows what it is, because you're the only one that has that mark, because you're the only one in where you are. But it is there for you. Your relevance realization will show it to you, and if you do not follow that, you actualize a lower level of good, and because what you are is constitutive of all the choices that you make. Your character is constitutive of those. The next mark that is available to you is lower.
yeah, yeah, this is, yeah. So your sin is in this configuration, it's reconfiguring your optimization parameters. You can no longer realize the like the global maximum for you. You can potentially achieve a local maximum, but that's you've cut yourself off from your best of all possible worlds, so to speak. Ah,
Yeah,
that's interesting. I'm
because
gonna have to.
like, one of the things that I think is a problem is like we make sin into much more of a monster than we need to. Like evil is distinct from sin,
Hmm,
but sin is like, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's none
hmm,
righteous, no, like, no, not one. Like, that's not this thing of like, that's not this big guilt and shame thing. It's just like, dude, you like, we all make a choice at some point, at least one in your life, where it's like, yeah, I could go and serve this person, but I'm a little tired right now and I'd like to sit on my couch,
yeah.
right? And that's
Oh
okay,
yeah.
and it's okay. That is what it is. Like, that's like, that's why there's grace, right? That's
Hmm,
and because the point isn't to get it all right. The point is to be where you are. And I think by our glorification of sin in a perverse way, we have actually, we've created a space, right? Like we think that it's like, oh, it's like almost like a half and half, like below half line, below 50th percentile, now you're sinning, right? Above 50th percentile of behavior, like you're fine, right? It's like, no, 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 like it means to miss the mark. It doesn't mean to shoot backwards.
That's good. That's good. Oh, that's good. Well, even from if you shift it a little bit to just like the realm of psychology and say, like, you maybe have a client who's ruminating on something. Maybe it's something that really irritates them about, say, their father or mother, and they're detailing that thing to you. And what you notice happening in terms of an interpersonal reaction, just like as you're trying to constitute for them an environment where the recapitulation of their family of origin can happen. You're engaging in this interpersonal process with them, and you see it start to play out with you. So the
Mhm.
same thing they're complaining about is now, and I mean complaining, like, this is my complaint, this is why I'm showing up. You witness it interacting right now with us right now. It's happening. Is that the same thing? And it's like, oh crap, because I was anchored to that thing that I hated, I was so focused on it that even as I was trying to do whatever I wanted, like I couldn't even see to do all that I wanted because I was so focused on the thing that I hated.
Well,
And
there's
that's
this
also
there's this way in which in every moment of time you only have a certain amount of energy.
hmm,
You have an energy allotment, as it were, right?
yes,
And
yes.
and there's this way in which, to the degree that your relevance realization is free, that energy is capable of actually moving into the present moment and creating something beautiful. But to the degree that you're like, it costs energy to hold things in unconscious. It
Mm,
costs energy to hang on to sins because and there's that this is there's this I'm going to throw in a really high level frame of grace here because like the grace of Christ is the grace of redemption and the grace of forgiveness, which means that and the idea of that is that you can let go of the sin at any time. You can repent of the sin and let go of it. And it may have actualized a lower order in the past, but now your relevance realization is going to be free again. So there's two aspects of it, right? Like you're still going to have lower order, like you're still going to have lower order targets available for you because you can't go back there. But your relevance realization can be free again. But
yeah,
in order to maintain the sin from frame to frame, you it takes energy to hold that at bay.
that's brilliant. That's a good way of saying that because that's one of the things that the gospels say is, let us lay aside the weight of the
Yes.
sin that so easily besets us
For
over and
my
over
for my
again.
yoke is easy and my burden is light.
And oh, okay, so stick with that. The my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I understand that he's talking about, like, it doesn't weigh much. It's not a yoke that is too hard for your back. You can do this. But going back to the light pollution.
Mm,
Okay, so my wife and I were in the Pacific, and they're working on local ordinances to get rid of light pollution because the way certain cultural groups want to orient their lives is in a traditional manner where the stars mean something in terms of how they
mm,
orient their lives, the seasons, how they navigate, all of this.
interesting.
And so when you go somewhere like, there's an observatory on the top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. And when you get up there, you're above the clouds, which is to say you're above the light pollution for long enough that you can start to observe phenomena that you didn't know existed.
Mm,
And you see things for the first time as they are.
mm,
And again, because I'm admitting here that there's also technological capacities that will allow you to extend a prosthetic for your eye. You can look through a telescope and you can see the rings of Saturn. And it's deeply humbling.
mm,
But what I want to argue is that part of the reason why people are missing the mark is because there are so many layers of thought pollution.
mm,
Call it civilizational level pollution, a kind of civilizational smog
mm,
that's so thick. It's that thing that's preventing people from getting back to the foundational layer of truth. The control J has been hit, the command J has been hit, and there's all these adjustment layers. And there's, in addition to that, there's just the civilizational smog. And it's the way in which it cares for you is also the degree to which it keeps hidden from you something fundamentally true about the world, which is that it is still inherently dangerous, that you
mm,
will not wrest power from nature, and that despite your protestations, you will die. Like these are bedrock level truths
mm,
that we want to evade them. And the degree to which our powers are outstripping our capacity to live in harmony with one another and the natural world, it's alarming. And I
mhm,
mean that's why these conversations are urgently needed. And in my talk with my wife yesterday, I said, one of the wager that I'm making is that conversations can actually change something.
mhm,
That it's a domino that you can push that will push and knock down other dominoes, or a lever you can pull that will, be impactful. Because look, we can't go on a pace like this with people under the presumption that shelves are just stocked,
mhm,
that there's always going to be plenty. Like, man,
mhm,
the history of the world just, I mean,
mhm.
how is this the mind virus, the operating software that we're running right now? Is like, what happened to the dinosaurs, man? We're burning them for fuel. Like, you
Well,
guys, we have.
and this is exactly that. We struggle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, right? It
Yeah.
is conversations. It is conversations. It is the it is the presencing of the logos to bring light to wake up those in darkness, really.
Ooh.
Because to be in underneath this smog, right, is to become when your mind is consumed by the smog of the collective kind of programming that is just running, right? And there's very little attention energy available to you in your true agency, right? It's like you'll still look and work exactly like everyone else, but how much are you a true agent? Well, to the degree that you're, you know, running things without paying attention to them, you're not agentic because it's the attention is the operative agentic movement. And so, like, sorry, I went a little bit too far down that hole. The 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 path forward though is not to there is no winning by defeating the people who are running the 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 flawed code.
Yeah.
that is loss. That is loss because that's your brother. That's you in a deep sense. That's you. And the way this gets better is by you providing agape and shining a little bit of a light, and maybe it and maybe there's a star that shines through the smog for someone.
It's beautifully said. I I know that like part of it is also we get the steel man complex, and I'm not talking about like the opposite of straw manning. I mean like we harden ourselves so much that one of the competing interests here in over technologizing is you have what we say we want is to become invulnerable. So the thing that keeps the equilibrium is the vulnerability. And so let me just lay some of my pride on the table and say that even as someone who grew up in this landscape where I mean it just I have these moments of awe where I'd be running through the woods and I knew I was like, man, the last person who had stepped right here was some
Mm,
native who is no longer here. How do we know this? There's like pottery, there's arrowheads and
mm.
things of that nature. And like I used to play this game with myself where when I was running through the woods, I wasn't allowed to stop. Like I had to like
Uh,
learn these paths well enough
yeah,
that if there was a new set of vines or thorns or something, then I'd have to be able to pivot and go to another one. It wasn't always successful, but that was the game that I would play.
that's cool. That's super cool.
Um, and so I realize now that I'm older, I lived a completely different kind of life growing up with livestock and raising them and running through the woods and all of this. Well, back several years ago when there was a blue moon and there was it was like a once in 100 year ordeal. And so my wife, um, who's not, um, she's not going to be the spokesperson for Patagonia. She's not, that's
Sure.
not her cup of tea, but she was like, wouldn't it be cool like to go to the farm and us camp under this once in a lifetime blue moon? And I
Totally.
was like, dude, let's do this. And
Totally.
so we get out there, we set up the tent. We're on this land that I've known my whole life, and I feel I know it as well as I know myself, which is revealing. And
Mhm.
so we get into the tent, and I mean it's bright. We had a great night. Well, just like one of those mystical temporal infinities where you really do, it's like this night it could go on forever. Oh wait, it does feel like it's gone on forever. And so when it's time to go to sleep, we get into the tent and we're laying there, and I'm just sort of peacefully dozing. And a few minutes goes by and my wife's like, what's that sound? And I was like, what sound? She was like, listen. And I listened and I didn't hear anything. She was like, there's some things out there. I was like, I don't think so, but I'll check. And so I get the lantern and I go out and I look, and I see nothing. And I did look. It's just so people are like, I did. I looked. And then I get back in the bed. I was like, it must just be the trees. The wind's blowing through the trees. No big deal. We go back to sleep. And again, she wakes me up and she's like, something is out there, man. I hear it. And I was like, okay, fine. And so I get the lantern, and this time like I take a single shot shotgun. It's like not cocked or anything. I don't even have it loaded because she's terrified of guns. But if you're gonna be out there, you gotta be prepared, people. Like where I'm talking about, like it's wild. And so um I'm walking around and I don't see anything. And it's so dark at this point that, like, even with a lantern, you're not seeing much. And so I go back and I was like, dude, that's like, I'm sorry. This is just what it is to be out here. You're going to hear things. Just know that. It's probably just the wind blowing leaves and thistles and all kinds of stuff like that. So, you know, I don't think she was buying it, but eventually we went to sleep. And the next morning when I got up, stretch and I'm walking around the tent, and there are coyote tracks everywhere, right? And so what did I draw from this other than I should listen to her more? But it was, I mean, I really did learn something important that, okay, there was something occurring beyond my perception.
Mhm,
And the degree to which I trusted my sense of knowing the familiar
mhm,
was the degree to which I fell victim to pride,
mhm,
um, and a distortion of the truth.
mhm,
Because whether or not I knew it, it didn't change the reality that there were coyotes there.
mhm,
And the fact that she perceived it and neither of us could see it also didn't mean that it wasn't there.
mhm,
And so there are things beyond the realm of our perception. And that's where I was going with the technology and the civilizational smog that it has sort of, it's, I don't know if it's that it's injured it, if it's, the Bible talks about like the mind blinding power of Satan. I don't know if
mhm,
it's just that like we have visual spiritual agnosia where
mhm,
I've talked about this before with like visual agnosia. I'm obsessed with this concept because it lends itself so well to where I think we are in terms of
mhm,
meaning crisis and healing crisis and awakening from this. But you can take someone with visual agnosia and you can put an apple in their hand and say, "What is that?" And they can
mhm,
say, "It's a red object. It's like a little bit roundish. It's got a little stick thing coming out of the top. Describe it in full." So they're doing the kind of empirical
the feature
describe this
list.
thing. And then you say, "What is it?" And they're like, "Is it a beach ball? Is it a hairbrush?" Like, I don't know what it is. I can describe
Mm,
it to you, but I don't know what it is.
mm,
That's what I'm talking about is like, we are just good enough that we can perceive the color, the shape of it, the texture. But then you ask me, what is it? I'm like, I don't, is it a hairbrush?
mm,
No, it's an apple.
mhm,
Okay, so how did we get to a place where we have stripped all of the things that constituted community
mm,
and rituals and practices and processes that got someone ready to live. I mean,
mhm,
if you've ever spent time with native or traditional or First Nations or whatever people that still orient their lives in a certain way, it's pretty profound that like their babies aren't birthed into silence. They're born into a cacophony of singing and chanting and drum beating, and
mhm,
just depends on what group you're talking about.
mhm,
But that child is welcomed into a world
mhm,
and exists within this framework that's it it does make sense of their life and it
mhm,
makes sense of their suffering.
mhm,
And one of the things that's hard for us is to make sense of what we perceive to be senseless suffering.
mhm,
But there are still people. Dr. Schiffelin's work with the Bosavi, he was there for a few decades, thousands of hours of participant observation. He's embedded in this community. And I just really could not believe this. I could not believe the reports that were being discussed, and they were using his name to say that there are these traditional people and despite the incredibly hard lives they lead, almost no manifestations of depression, suicidality, any of that.
Mhm.
And so I was like, you gotta be like, level with me here. Is this true? And he's like, I'm not going to deny that that is how people report on my
Mhm.
observation. He said, let me just tell you, these people have never had it easy. This is not some Akkadian, you know, Greek myth about how the world was. It's hard. It is brutal. There is
Mhm.
warfare. There is suffering, child death, like all of it.
Mhm.
And yet, according to our DSM, you couldn't diagnose those people with depression.
Mhm.
Now, you tell me how that makes sense when almost like, I don't know, it's the numbers vary, but depending on what Western country you're talking about, no small number of people are on psychotropic drugs.
Mhm.
They're on some form of an amphetamine, salt, Adderall, Ritalin, whatever they're on. Like,
Mhm.
what does it mean to live in a culture so cut off that in order to habituate yourself to the system, you need to take something that tells you that the thing that you perceive to be wrong isn't wrong.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because
Wow.
I think one of the things
Wow.
that we're learning about the paradoxical effects of something like ADHD and um, we'll go with Adderall since that's commonly prescribed. I could be wrong. I think that the theory could be wrong, but the one that I think is favorably disposed to being the most accurate is that we thought that this is just a focus problem or an attentional problem. If
Mhm.
you're in an attentional economy, in an informational age, then not paying attention is catastrophic. You're not going to get the job. You're not going to get the grad school. And I'm telling you, talking to tons, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students over the course of years, the fact that they're taking it illicitly
Mhm.
and you unpack that with them, you say, chain this out for me. Why are you doing it? I need it for this test. Why do you need it for the test? Well, if I don't make an A on this test, I'm not going to get an A in the class. Well, what does that mean? If I don't get an A in the class, I'm not going to have a good enough GPA when I graduate. Well, what does that matter? Well, if I don't get a good enough GPA when I graduate, I can go to grad school. What do you want to go to grad school for? So I can get the job that I want. What job is this? It's a job that makes the money that allows me to buy the house and the car so I can secure the person that I want to be with. So honest to God, for them, a test is an existential threat
Yes.
because not getting an A on that test immediately in front of them could potentially, like you said, like what sin would do is like it cuts them off from the global maximum for their life, the global optimum for their they can't realize anything better than if they get a C plus. What's that? That's average, a little bit better than average. Who wants to be better, a little bit better than average? So I'm asking them, what does it mean to live in a culture where one you risk breaking a law, whether or not you agree that it should be a law, immaterial. It is a law. Without a script, you shouldn't be taking it. Okay, it's a controlled substance. So you're willing to break the law. You're willing to go against the FDA and say that it isn't potentially dangerous for me, um, and that I'm not going to get habituated to it. So, what does it mean to live in a culture where a form of biotechnology is being foisted on you as the answer to the realization and actualization of who you want to be as an identity, as a person. What's
Hmm.
it like to live under that pressure? And I'm telling you, man, like as much as we want to call these kids snowflakes and all of that, like, can you not have pity,
Yeah,
empathy, really like say, well, okay, man, we've done something horribly wrong
yeah.
here,
Their
where
courage is exhausted.
their decision fatigue, cognitive overload, information overload. I mean, like measurable phenomena.
Not to mention, think about. So you have every decision as an existential crisis because the courage to be comes from a productivity model,
Yes. Yeah.
and therefore you have to exercise the full extent of your courage to be in order to move through every perceived step of this process. And in order to do so, you are you are equipped with an ends justifies the means uh, moralism, and therefore you make choices that are like exactly as you're saying, that bind you into a net of making multiple levels of bad decision in order to obtain what for you is the highest good, because it's literally the existential continuation of what you define yourself to be.
Yeah. And so think about, again, one of the problems in AI. It's it's not like anyone, I don't think anyone actually thinks this is the problem, but it's a good example of what getting alignment and optimization wrong could do for you. And that it's almost 100% assured that we're going to get alignment wrong because we don't know who we are and what we're doing. And the degree to which we continue to lie to ourselves about that is the setup for, you talk about the fall, man, a paperclip optimizing AI where you say like, hey, or or a better example might be if you want an AI to help humanity optimize for happiness, and in its training data it sees, that there's a smile on everyone's face. Okay, so the shortcut to getting what it may conceive as fully optimized is that why not take a staple and staple everyone like this so that they're smiling where they want to be or not, because then it's taking the shortest route to accomplishing the goal.
Yeah. And you get
I
a brave new
think,
world.
yeah. Well, and look, we are, again, like there's the degree to which you participate in the bio nano information tech ecology, you're also making yourself vulnerable to it,
Mm,
in the sense
mm.
that, I mean, do we believe that the organizations and entities that, well, let's just, C.S. Lewis said, like, look, in man's desire to wrest power for nature, what we've done is we've just made ourselves more subject to it.
Hmm.
And I think that that's where I'm at, is because there's no chance that you can go to most of these youth that I've dealt with, and I'm talking about major research one university and in a clinical setting. People do not believe me when I tell them this. In the state that I live in right now, in Florida, our behavioral health block grant for all behavioral health spending, it's in the billions, and it's not small billions. It's a lot of money. And I was helping run this program that was aimed at enhancing the services that were delivered to people that had behavioral health diagnoses. Again, this is sort of like applied bioethics. How do we get the people who need services what they need, where they are? And I was writing this grant to the National Institutes of Mental Health, and we were awarded the grant funding, I think, because of one stat. I was going through the Medicaid data and I could not believe this, but children and youth in the state of Florida represented, if they were taken as a demographic, third largest demographic in the third largest state in the United States. I mean, talk about combinatorial explosion. It's like these are children and youth with severe emotional disturbances. I mean, it it so broke what we were using as the model for how we would deliver services and divert funding.
Mm-hmm.
But no one could tell us. I mean, the TA network that we worked with out of DC, we had summits, we have studies, we have all of this. No one can tell why is it happening at a rate that's accelerating beyond any kind of rate that you would think would be normal. The rate of acceleration is accelerating both on the technological front, but then also on like a sort of growing mismatch again with our genetic endowment and the environment that we are building. And I don't see a world in which you have at least a huge minority. I mean, 20%. It's anticipated in the next several years that you're going to get like a coin flip for who's born with something like autism, depending on their gender. We're
I
we're
mean, if
obviously not doing something right. I'm not saying I have the answer because I'm saying no one that I've talked to, the epidemiologist, no one had an answer for why it was exploding at the rate that it is. But you said you can't get around sacrifice, and I'm saying, what are we doing? We are sacrificing kids. We're
yes,
sacrificing. It may not be
yes,
an Incan, type sacrifice. It
we're
may not
just
be an
removed from it. We're just removed
yes.
from it.
In
But we
this,
acted out, right? If there is an epidemic in this country of young males who will purchase firearms and go and shoot people, preferentially children, because of the level of hell that has been actualized in their life. And the fact that that's happened once is astonishing. The fact that it has happened more times than you can count on your two hands in the last, I don't know, who knows how long. There's too many to report on now. It tells you something that, like, I have these conversations every time there's a shooting. I have these conversations. Like I had one not too long ago with a doctor that I work with, and he was talking about, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because this is always the response that people have. It's, oh, what is going on? How could this be happening? And it's, oh, it's the guns, it's the guns, it's the guns. And it's like, I'm sure have your conversation about gun control. I don't want to say anything about that. I
yeah,
don't, but that is not the problem. The problem is if you're the culture and the if you want to use the computer analogy, the programming that's handed to these children, if you want to use spiritual terminology, the weight of guilt and the twistedness with which all of society around them regards them. I mean, we live in a world where like I'm my wife's pregnant with our first child, and one of the most common um, things, and I deal with it in myself, is the intense concern of how much this is going to hurt my life or something like this.
yeah,
And it's like, what are we doing, man? How
yeah.
how did we get here? How disembedded are we from the world? If we look back at our ancestors, these people who have suffered immeasurably, and that's just as humans, right? You want to talk about suffering, go and be a mosquito or whatever, right? But if we take the evolutionary story seriously, then our ancestry goes back to the very beginning of the world, and we are embedded in this thing, and we spit in their face. We spit in the face of all of that suffering. when we count as nothing the future and sacrifice it on, I mean, this is the idea of Moloch, right? This is the sacrifice
Mm,
to Moloch. And we act it out, right? Like, even though we're so far removed from it, right? Like, we don't have conversations with our children as parents, right? I work in cardiology. I have so, like, most of my population of my patients is over 70. And there's a significant number of them that are raising their grandchildren.
wow.
And nearly all of them tell me about significant behavioral issues they have with them. And this is not this has nothing to do with research. This is community cardiovascular disease.
Mm,
And and so we remove ourselves from them, um, and we won't even have conversations with our own children about things that are important. We tell them, you know, therapy is wonderful, but and everyone should have a therapist in the sense of of an objective person to reflect ideas off of, but it's not a substitute for being a parent.
yikes. Yes.
And it's
And
like, oh God.
well, when I would go to these events that we would have throughout the state, and we would talk about these issues. I mean, I just sort of like, I didn't know what else to say at some point other than, listen, you guys, um, I understand what the best evidence-based practice. I understand what are the promising practices. But what you guys seem to be saying to me is we have a surgeon shortage. There's a particular type of gunshot wound that, if it happens in a certain place in the gut, you probably have way more knowledge about this, but I want to say it was in either in like Baltimore in Maryland, or maybe it was at Hopkins. They were trying a new approach to treating this particular gunshot wound, because they're like, it's almost always fatal. But the reason why it's almost always fatal is not, it's not that it's just like trickier, it's that they just need a little more time. And so they started developing an approach where when they get to the victim, they would try to rapidly cool their body as
Hmm.
like quickly as possible to try to like preserve their tissue and all that, so that they could extend the window that they could actually operate on. And so I told everybody, I was like, look, it's like you guys want more surgeons flying into Maryland, because the kid walked out of the front door and he got shot, and he needs the best surgeon in the world because it's a particular kind of gunshot wound, and it's gonna be lethal if we don't have the best and they're not doing these novel things. I said, but the thing is, you return him to the community, and guess what? He comes out his front door again, he gets shot again, and it's the
Hmm.
same kind of, it's the same wound. And so at some point, it's like, it's not a surgeon problem, it's that we've created an environment that's inhospitable to life.
Hmm.
And if you have an environment that's inhospitable to life, one of the things that, and I definitely want to hear you expound a little more on the idea of like what you meant by the, because your wife's pregnant, you wonder like what it's going to cost you.
Hmm.
But um if, when I would go around, I'd say like, look, what do we need to be doing this program? Well, we need to reward picking up a book instead of a gun. Like, that's,
Hmm.
numero uno. Let's reward them for good behavior.
Hmm.
And why can we not create an environment where sociality, pro-social behavior is the thing that is the dominant or default mode for
Hmm.
kids? Like, I mean, you'll see this when your child is born. I mean, they are amenable to they are absolute barbarians, and it's
Hmm.
your job to help civilize them. Like, that's they are suicide machines. I mean, they
Hmm.
just walk into stuff, they put their fingers into stuff, they put things in their mouths. And so like the first several years of your life with them is just trying to keep them from not dying. Like, it
Hmm.
really is like, yep. And we have an increasingly technologized environment that like more things can go wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
But we've so cut them off And I mean this at like the most profound systematic level of actualizing any kind of heroic arc
Mm-hmm.
for their lives. That this is what Becker predicted in 1973, I think, in The Denial of Death. He said, you know what? When you do that, mark it down, you're going to see the rise of the anti-hero,
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to go on what you've given them. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have barred them from what societies would have for eons have invested in them and have built rituals and traditions around everything from birth to marriage to child rearing, all of it. And then at the final moment, death. If you bar them from that, then they will, it's like an autoimmune response. It's
Mm-hmm.
they're telling us something important about
Mm-hmm.
what it is we're giving them.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I can't see a world in which these these youth that I'm talking about are able to approach death in a way that is anything but kicking and screaming, because they're going to have a resentment
Mm-hmm.
towards an environment that, look, a certain amount of progress is good, but the book Age of Anger, um Pankaj Mishra, he's polemical. He says things that I don't agree with, but he's a fabulous writer. And one of the things that he says in the book is he talks about like the rapid secularization and industrialization, how these two things are going hand in hand. And he's from a very traditional family where now he spends like 6 months in a small village, like outside the Himalayas, and 6 months in London. And I heard him in an interview, someone was asking him about like his faith. And he said, look, I can no longer believe in the way that was available to my parents. I can't. He's like, for them, like the world is suffused with meaning and purpose, and God is a part of that. And he's like, I just fundamentally can't do it. I can't
Mm-hmm.
get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm I'm wondering if the best thing you can offer to a society is to say the inequality is going to be off the charts. You're going to have people that were richer than every king who ever lived combined,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time that you have children being shot in schools. And that growing inequality, it cannot go on forever, or you will have like the societal immune system will start to react to that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it'll burn itself down before it lets it just continue on a pace without. But there are really a group of technologists, wealthy philanthropists that think we can just continue to mechanize our way through this. And I'm dubious that this is a claim that's going to work, because they're all aging.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to write a book on the day Kurzweil died,
Mm-hmm.
because he believes the singularity is near. Well, the whole me and Michael Hauskeller wrote about this. That the idea of the singularity is like you can't see beyond the event horizon. So it's again, we've gotten all the way back with all of our technology to we arrive at the place where we started, where things are fundamentally unknowable and undecidable. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do you want to live your life? Like we have to do a better job of preparing people, because it's as if none of it is real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even the degree to which someone quite old, like when my grandmother died, it's fairly recently. She died at home. She was almost 90.
Mm-hmm.
She was fully conscious, fully cognizant.
Mm-hmm.
And she was able to have conversations with us. And one of the things she said was like, I just can't believe this is happening.
Mm,
And my mom was like, really? I mean, you're like almost 90, almost everyone that you've ever known is gone.
mm-hmm,
All of your family members, except for your siblings and grandchildren. I mean, except for your children and their siblings
mm-hmm,
and your grandchildren. Like, what did you think was going to happen? It's just like, no, it's not that I didn't think it was coming. It's like, I just, now that it's here, I can't believe that it's here.
mm.
And in your experience, you tell me why this is the case. I found this just, it's mystifying, and it's a common theme that people who are dying will start to encounter loved
Mm-hmm.
ones who have gone on before.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found just like so unsettling is that here my whole family was like, we were there surrounding her, but she started calling out to the person that she had had the least amount of interaction with for like decades. She started calling out to her mother and started talking to her. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
why isn't she talking to like her daughters, her son, her grandchildren? It's like there's something that starts happening where, and again, this isn't unique to my grandmother. You'll know plenty of these narratives where, I mean, it's for some reason the person that I would, if you were doing a pre-test, post-test, like the person you predict to be the one that they would talk to, why would it not be the one in the room, including their spouse? Like these are the final moments of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they talking to someone that you can't perceive? You can't
Mm-hmm.
see them, but like
Mm-hmm.
what is that about, man? Like
Yeah.
something's happening there that I don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
What
you can
are,
say hallucination, but you're going to have to define what that word means, and good luck.
yeah, because there are those that would argue that that's just all consciousness is.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there
But
are,
but there's this way in which, right, like in this entire arc that we've been painting, there's this fear of death, there's the turning away, there's the inability to have the courage to face death. And when you don't have the courage to face something, it traps you.
mm,
And when we're trapped by death, you know, the modern side of my brain needs all the justifications for, well, how might I explain the fact that they're talking to someone who has gone before them? But that's because the modern brain is looking at it from a perspective that cannot face death. And because it cannot face death, it cannot talk about it in a way that gives it some kind of true reality. So I have to
mm,
make up some kind of story. I have to, you know, who knows? It's their brain cells firing, misfiring. It's there's, who knows, right? There's these hallucinations. There's all this stuff. But but the tyranny of propositions ends at death, and
that's deep.
you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what's on the other side. You can build projections and you can build constructs and you can do whatever you want with them, but you cannot support your propositions in any of the ways that we otherwise support them.
The
And there,
ultimate epistemic challenge.
yes, and it is thereby shown that the attempt to contain or reduce reality into the propositional space and to make that the ontological ground, and thereby to ground our being in our level of ability to abstract and to create conceptual mapping and to create landscapes in our minds and propositions from those, that is not and cannot be the ground of being itself.
Is that the control J that we're operating on top of that layer and don't even realize it?
That is,
It's
yes, that is exactly right. That is original sin.
that's it's so wild because
That's
there
why. That's why. When, sorry, just to finish. That's why the day that you eat of the fruit, you will die. Because
the
death doesn't kill you until you're stuck in the propositional space.
yikes. the Greeks, so people, they'll assert that anytime the Platonic Socrates, when he's in a bind, he doesn't have a straightforward answer, he'll wax mythical. um but there's the one, the myth of the Last Judgment. And I think this may be where we're at. He says, in Phaedrus, that it used to be the case that for mankind, the gods would give you a death date,
Mm.
and you could know in advance when it would be. But the gods ran into a problem because humans started misusing that. So they would live their lives as foolishly and licentiously as they possibly could, knowing that they could get their act together right before death, and they'd wear their best clothes to their death date, and then they'd be judged, and they go to the afterlife. And so what the gods did was they said, we can't let this stand. We're going to keep the fact that they're going to know they're going to die. We're just going to toss out the knowledge of when it's going to happen, so they'll live with that sort of inner, it could happen today.
Mm.
That's, I mean, it seems like that almost feels true to me, that like I know that one day I will die, but it is unreal. Like,
Mm.
it's fundamentally, it feels unreal.
Mhm.
And I think we have a lot of work to do to be able to bridge that chasm, because there may be a group of people in the not too distant future who are able to live incredibly long lives. If they
Mm.
are able to live long enough to see some of the emerging techs come online, then they may indeed live what we would consider now indefinitely long lives. We're not there yet, but I mean, you can see that it's not also that far away. Even if you said it was hundreds of years,
Mm.
evolutionary time scale, that's just a blip. But in the meantime, there are phenomenon that you can just say that aren't hallucinations, that are, you're making contact with something that, like, another example from my own life is my mother-in-law. Her mother got dementia and then Alzheimer's, and the last couple years of her life were just spent totally non-responsive. The
Mm.
last several months of her life were spent like comatose.
Mm.
And she was a devout Catholic lady, and my mother-in-law, being the empirically minded person that she is, she's PhD, and she was sitting by her mom's bedside, and she was like, "Mom, how do you believe this stuff you believe? It's just like, it's just nonsense. Like, you can't really believe this stuff." And of course, like, again, this woman had not spoken to another person that we know of in the realm that we're in for probably years, but definitely the last half year of her life in like a coma. And she sat straight up and looked at her, and she said something to the effect of, your problem is that you want concrete answers for everything, but you need to embrace faith and what that can give to you, what that can give to your life. And she was like, no, it's not all just myth and dream and unreality. This is real. And those were her parting words. And I
Wow.
mean, you will have, I know that you've heard so many different stories of, like, the model is like, the person is very sick, they're very ill, whatever, they've gone down to the chasm, they're not coming out, but there's a loved one. And they're hanging on long enough for that loved one to get there. They get there, the loved one is like, I'm here, and then boom, that person dies, or they say something like one last rally and they speak their piece and then they die.
Mm-hmm.
This to me is like, man, they're it's going to sound woo to people, but wait until you get there and see what I'm talking about. I can tell you that there were people that I would be around when I was at my lowest, where I was like, man, I am about to die. And they would come around me or they would come into my room, whatever. And it was almost as if there are some people who can lend you their energy. I have no
Mm-hmm.
idea what I mean by that. I
Mm-hmm.
know that you can shake somebody's hand and you can transfer electrons. I don't know what's happening, but I know that there were people that could create enough space in them that they allowed something to happen in that interaction where I was able to draw strength from them.
Mm-hmm.
And, for you situating yourself as you do and having these interactions, I just look, I commend you because it's so hard. It's hard to be on both sides of it, obviously. But, the fact that you're willing to be open and say like, well, what's the what's the narrative medicine here?
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different conversation because it looks different for different people what they need. um
Mm-hmm.
but the fact that you're trying to create space in yourself to have a meaningful I thou with the person without shrinking back,
Mm-hmm.
without like missing the mark, without
Mm-hmm.
choosing hell that day, man, it matters so much, not just to that person, but to the entire family, how that goes down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it is, it's something that you never get over either.
Mm-hmm.
Like the death of someone you love, there are those who will say you don't experience your own death because you're not there. It's only your family. And I call baloney
Mm-hmm.
because you experience something far worse. You experience your own self dying.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't, the degree to which we don't know what's happening when that's going
Mm-hmm.
on is just, I mean, like we're not even close to knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But for all the people that wanted my parents to throw in the towel and euthanize me, like, um, there were those that I encountered along the way that maybe it was just the way they gave the IV
Mm-hmm.
or the way they administered the medication without just doing get out of the room as fast as they could because they didn't want to be around it. Like the type of care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, those are the little things that added up in my own experience that, it was the difference between staying in the game and not.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, a day-to-day thing where, just like the dialectic, man, I need you,
Mm-hmm.
and I need you to be your best self, your agentic best, because there are people all around here who are going to blame God for totally inept and incompetent behavior on the part of the provider. That may not be fair,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times it's true than we would want to believe. Like
Mm-hmm.
when this whenever COVID is something that we will have critical distance from, and we will be able to look back on this period of insanity. Yeah, dude, there's just no telling how many people died of just straight up to die alone, connected
Mm-hmm.
to cables and wires. And I mean, this is the postmodern, like
Mm-hmm.
the apotheosis. Like, this is the best you can get, is
Mm-hmm.
like you can get all the care. You can die on a ventilator alone, no one allowed even in the room. And maybe your loved ones can watch you die on an iPad. Good God, man.
Yeah.
Like, even with people who will willingly risk their lives to be with their loved ones, we said, no, you cannot. They will die alone. Dude, I,
Yeah.
Any of you out there who think like this is just good public health, I truly think this is the like if it's not the worst sin that our civilization has committed
Mm,
in a long time is like forcing people to die
mm,
completely on their own,
mm.
alone.
Not
That's
even giving their loved ones the agency to take upon themselves risk.
it's insane. And I
Mm,
appreciate anyone who's willing to be in this theater and to treat people with dignity and respect and try to give them the worst news they're ever going to hear,
mm,
um, in a way that doesn't totally unmake them and everyone associated with them all at once.
mm.
Because I mean, that is a tightrope. And I don't envy your position at all.
That is, those are many very kind words. I'm very grateful. Thank you. That is, and I, especially because it comes from someone who knows what that means, in a way that probably very few do. I appreciate that very much.
Man,
And
it's been a huge gift. What a conversation.
yeah,
It's been
we got to wrap up, I suppose.
yeah, I'm gonna uh, I I'm always afraid that if I go much longer, I'm gonna hear the cries of a toddler who's sleeping in her own bed, but she just got back from her grandparents, and so I know any minute she's gonna start screaming for me, and so I'm gonna have to go running.
Yeah.
But this has
Do you
been
have
awesome,
any
man.
do you have any kind of like closing thing you want to end with, or we've covered an awful lot of territory, but
So much territory. Yeah, I mean, just maybe like the first, almost always the first assumption, the first pass at whatever it is you're thinking about or trying to investigate. There's a reason why we set a null hypothesis. And
mm,
so I would say we need a coin with two sides where we have a whole lot more radical doubt
mm,
than we seem to display, and then a whole lot more faith than we seem
mm,
capable at the moment of mustering. We need both of those things in order to get through the precarious times we're headed into, because make no mistake, the novelty is increasing, and with it, the technological capacities and the externalities that's what we so-called externalities, the things that may go wrong.
mm,
Um, but if what can happen to the world can happen to the world in say November or December, early December of 2019, if you said in a few weeks there's going to be a global pandemic and it's going to be a beta coronavirus and it's going to completely shut down civilization as we know it in many ways. If you didn't predict that, then you didn't see it coming.
mm,
And you're not as good at predicting the future as you think you are.
mhm,
Because the theoria that you are, if you were perfect, then you know you wouldn't experience death. I don't think if you were
mm,
perfect, you could perfectly match reality tit for tat for everything and demand it out of you every second of every day. Maybe you don't go the way that us mortals do, but um, you'd be the first. Uh, and my wager is not on that happening. Not so. Doubt yourself a little more. Have faith a little more, and have faith in other people a little more. And let's see if we can just keep talking to one another, even if we disagree. Good God, let's just keep talking. Words, not swords.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's beautiful. Yes, amen. Well, thank you, man.
What a
been
gift,
awesome.
man. Awesome. Truly, truly.